Hi there everyone, my name's Dave West. I hope we're all doing well. So welcome back to another ultimate video test, and this time for the iPhone SE 2020, and this time in low light conditions. So as with all ultimate video tests, I'll leave all of the main camera specifications down in the description, and I'll just run through some of the high level features throughout this video to help save you some time. So we'll start with the front facing camera then, and this is a 7 megapixel fixed focus camera. It records video at 1080p at up to 30 frames per second, and it also benefits from Apple's cinematic image stabilization, or electronic image stabilization to the rest of us. So let's just take a stop here and just take a look at how it handles changes in light around us. And we'll check out lens flare from things like street lighting as well. Now, previous iPhones have had some pretty crazy lens flare, and this is no exception by the looks of it. Kind of get a sort of star effect you can see, like blooming out from the light behind. But that's not looking too bad. You let me know how the image looks when it's recording. You can't really see the kind of jitters that you get with the image stabilization when it's all being processed in the background. But you let me know what you think of the quality so far. So let's check out the image stabilization then with a quick run. Now, in low light conditions, the electronic image stabilization does tend to suffer. It's not iPhone exclusive, it happens on pretty much every phone that I've tested. Electronic image stabilization does need a lot of light in order to perform at its best, and obviously as light starts to fade, then obviously it does start to suffer and you kind of get a mushy, slightly jittery effect. But you let me know what you think of the front facing camera video, and I will switch to the rear cameras and I'll show you how that works in low light. Alright, so I'm just going to start the rear camera video test at 1080p at 30 frames per second. And the rear camera is a 12 megapixel autofocus camera, and it can record video up to 4K at 60 frames per second. And this also benefits from Apple's cinematic image stabilization. And both the front and rear cameras can record in stereo sound, but you can change that to mono should you wish. Now, I'm starting with 1080p 30 because this is a good compromise resolution if you want to save on space. It's still really good quality, but it does help you to use less of your internal storage. So let's move from this slightly darker area into somewhere which is a little lighter, and let's just check out how it handles detail on this machine here, and that's looking pretty good. We'll check out autofocus a bit further on in the video, but colors are pretty accurate from the parking machine, and it handles the changes in exposure with these bright lights at the top there. You can just see as I move towards that, you can see it acts really quickly in stopping those from blooming out. Now I'll show you the image stabilization when I switch to the 4K part, because it works the same regardless. But this is how things look at 1080p at 30 frames per second. So I've seen a street lamp there. Let's see how the rear lens looks with things like street lighting and how it handles lens flare. And you can see it's pretty crazy. Well, it does look cool, but it can get quite distracting, especially if the phone picks up light at the sides of its lens. You can just look here. You can see it's already picking up light from that street lamp and a slight flare on the sides of the lens, but it's nothing too crazy. So I'm just going to move to this area here where it's a lot darker. The street lights are now behind me. There's one just off to my left. But the iPhone is doing a really good job, I think, of lifting the exposure, but that may be at the expense of the image stabilization. So let's just take a look out across the water here. Alright, so that is 1080p at 30 frames per second from the rear camera then. Okay, so kicking off 4K then at 24 frames per second. Now Apple does allow you to toggle this in the settings to automatically go down to 24 frames per second in low light situations, and that's to help give better image quality. But in past tests with other iPhones, it doesn't really work that well, to be perfectly honest. But I'm just showing it in this video just to give you an idea of how it looks. Now we're in quite a well lit area here, but I'm going to move over to somewhere where it's not quite so well lit, where there's less street lighting around me. So we'll just pass into this building here to give you an idea. Now this section here, for example, I know, for example, in 30 frames per second it would look a little bit better, so we'll revisit this part in a moment. And we'll just continue. And we can see this area just around the middle here is not so well lit because it's a bit further away from street lighting. But you let me know what you think of the video at 4K at 24 frames per second. I will look out over the Bay Area, and it's looking pretty dark there, as you can see. So we'll switch to 4K 30 in a moment and I'll show you the difference and how that looks. Okay, so this is 4K 30 frames per second. You can see already there's quite a difference, although it doesn't look brilliant in my opinion. You can see it's allowing a lot more lighting now into the center. So we'll just continue over this way. Now if we just look behind and look at this building here quickly before I move around, we can see the front entrance of this building here much more clearly than at 24 frames per second. While we're here, we'll check out the electronic image stabilization at 4K 30 with a quick run. So you let me know what you think of how the phone looks at speed and how the image stabilization copes with that. So while we've got some light around us, let's just check out autofocus. And you can see it's slow to get a lock, but when it does do, it's nice and sharp. Much slower than in daylight conditions, but I'm not looking for perfection. We're just looking for something which eventually gets autofocus. I mean, these are extreme conditions, so it's not going to be ideal. But there we go. Okay, so that is 4K at 30 frames per second. Okay, so last one we're trying out then is 4K at 60 frames per second. I wouldn't usually advise using 4K 60 in low light or 60 frames per second at all in low light. The reason for that is because it takes twice as long for light to hit the sensor in this mode, and therefore it can end up being very dark. So I mean, it's not too bad here, but if I turn around you'll see it's quite dim in that area of the picture. It looks a lot lighter to the naked eye. If I turn around to a more well lit area where these flood lamps in the distance here are lighting up the Pierhead Visitor Centre here in Cardiff Bay, you can see that, I mean, the detail is reasonable and lighting is good, but again, it isn't ideal. So that is all of the rear camera modes then. starting from 1080/30 up to 4K at 60 frames per second, and you let me know what you think. Alright, so that's the end of the ultimate video test in low light for the iPhone SE 2020. Again, these aren't ideal conditions, but this is just to give you an idea of how Apple's new budget-friendly iPhone performs in less than ideal low light conditions. So if you've got any questions about anything you've seen in this video, then please do let me know down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And don't forget, if you're new around here, then please do consider subscribing so you don't miss more videos coming on this channel very, very soon. But for now, this has been my ultimate video test in low light for the iPhone SE 2020. My name is Dave West, and I'll catch you guys later.